Is Unholy Death Knight a dead class? Is it pretty much useless? Are you going to be banished to the C or B tier of the DPS meters and no longer be able to pump? Well, I'm here today to tell you that is not at all the truth, but you have to play significantly better and differently as an Unholy DK if you want to pump now. But don't worry, because today I got you covered on how to play the class well. Just for DPS reference, so you know that I understand how to play Death Knights moving into this new phase, you can see that already I do have 100 knocked out and mostly 99s, although there are some fights that I died this week when we were doing hard modes that I should be able to go in and do significantly better next week. So there are some fights where you can do extremely well on DPS as an Unholy DK, and I would actually wager there are quite a few fights where you would prefer to go Frost. But for the sake of today's video, we are talking about Unholy DKs, and I'm not going to go boss by boss and which bosses you want to be Frost or Unholy and how to play each of those individually. That will be a new video coming out either later this week or maybe next week, as well as a Frost guide for this phase and how to utilize the desync rotation to do significantly more DPS. Instead, we're going to look at how to min-max Unholy DK in this new phase, what gear you want to look at, what are your questions and the answers to your questions for this phase. And also, if you want to look, you'll notice that mostly at the top is a lot of Death Knights. There are some rogues and some hunters other than warlocks. Warlocks absolutely dominate this phase, and they will continue to dominate this phase moving forward if you're looking at boss damages. But right below them is actually gonna be Death Knights right now, and DKs scale really well in this phase. Well, first let's look at how our BiS list changes, and realistically, Comet's Trail is still your best trinket. You can also see big upgrades from using something like Wrathstone now, which can be really useful, but the trinket you're probably gonna use mostly into this phase is gonna be Mark of Norgannon. And the Sims do actually calculate the gargoyles now as that dynamic gargoyle, where the gargoyle reassesses your haste at the beginning of every single cast. And this is going to be huge for moving into the actual playstyle. Now let's start with a little bit of Q&A. What is the best race for Unholy DKs now? The best race is actually gonna be Orc over Troll now. It's no longer as important to be a Troll, and Blizzard doesn't seem to be giving us race change anytime soon. So if you are an Orc, rejoice, it is actually the higher DPS race. If you're Alliance, it doesn't really change anything for you this phase. Should I be using Black Magic in my offhand? The short answer is no. Black Magic needs to proc to have 100% uptime while Gargoyle is casting, and even in a perfect situation, it is only giving you almost one cast for your Gargoyle. So it is no longer worth it, because when you do swap weapons, you do actually stop your melee swings from going out. It resets your auto attack timer, so it is not worth it. On the same note, is berserking worth it? This one is more situational. It can be worth it on more of the AoE situations, but it is pretty much not worth it, although I do like it on some of the AoE fights. But the AoE situations in Ulduar open us up to the opportunity of using Rune of Cinder Glacier actually as your second rune. And when this procs, it means all of your frost or shadow damage abilities for the next two attacks will do 20% extra damage. This does snapshot on Death and Decay and is a massive DPS gain on certain situations, huge AoE fights if Cinder Glacier does proc, although the actual proc rate is significantly lower than what you usually would expect. You should actually opt potentially to use it in your main hand and get a big DPS increase on some AoE fights, something like Freya in particular. Should we utilize pre-pot, so pre-potions? Pre-potting is now only worth it if you are going to get two gargoyles in that fight. If you are in a one gargoyle fight, you no longer want to pre-pot. You're going to actually use all of your haste procs later than you would originally, and we'll get into that with the rotation. I get this question all the time, but the Evil Face Unholy only spec, do I want to be now utilizing Evil Face Unholy only spec? And the reason why you mostly won't want to do this is because it is barely a DPS gain for some single target quick fights, but it is not very useful for cleave situations, which actually happens a decent amount in Ulduar. There's quite a few fights that have cleave, and not being in blood presence, getting that 15% extra damage on every single target can be a huge DPS loss. So if you want to do it, you technically can, but make sure you're ready with a normal spec for any of these cleave fights. Does Army of the Dead still snapshot? And the answer to this is yes. Army of the Dead still absolutely snapshots your haste and attack power when it's being summoned, so you want to use it after you've used all of your haste procs. And with that, let's talk about your playstyle as an Unholy Death Knight now. This is where most of the change comes from Unholy Decays to Phase 2. This is because you are no longer significantly focused purely on your opener for most situations. You're going to actually focus more on your normal upkeep rotation throughout the fight, which doesn't actually change, than you are on anything like a snapshot. Generally, the opener is no longer make or break for you as a class. Now that Gargoyle changes dynamically on your haste as you are proceeding through a fight, what you want to do is make sure all of your haste procs, as well as you being in an unholy presence, is happening only when your Gargoyle is casting. That means if you are starting a fight off and you are going to be snapshotting early or summoning your Gargoyle early and bloodlusting right away, you want to open the fight again in Unholy Presence like you used to do. But you are going to stay in Unholy Presence until your Gargoyle is gone. With that being said, if your raid is not bloodlusting right away, or there is a break point or a DPS check later on in the fight and you are saving your Gargoyle for that, you will open the fight in Blood Presence now. No longer will you always open in Unholy Presence, but you will open the fight in Blood Presence, and then as soon as you're about to summon your Gargoyle, you will move into Unholy Presence. But now in Phase 2, you have to think a lot more about how you're going to play each fight. Are you going to get 2 Gargoyles? If so, you will then use one early on in the fight and probably pre-pot, and then when it flies away, you'll go into Blood Presence. Then when you're going to get your second Gargoyle, you will go back into Unholy Presence and stay in that presence one more time as you have the Gargoyle up. And again, you want to use all of your haste procs, things like potions and trinkets, after you've actually summoned the Gargoyle, about 3 seconds later when it flies down and starts to actually attack. Now this begs the question, what is now the ideal opener in a situation where you will be bloodlusting right off the bat? So if we're in this situation, you'll use Ghoul Frenzy right before the fight starts. You're going to open the fight as usual in Unholy Presence. You're going to Icy Touch into Plague Strike to get all of your diseases up, and then hit with a Blood Strike to get yourself Desolation. Now you can use your Blood Tap to get enough runes back to use Death and Decay. Then you will use your Gargoyle. You can either use Gargoyle right now or use Empowered Rune Weapon right now. You can switch around these 2 buttons. Then you will go back into your normal rotation, doing an Icy Touch into a Plague Strike and a Blood Boil right now. This is just using 3 of your runes, putting them on CD, and allowing you enough time for your Gargoyle to come down and start actually attacking. Now you will use all of your haste procs. Pop your Gloods, your Trinket, your Racial, anything else you have, and summon Army of the Dead. Now, I do want to mention, I did say racial there. That's purely for trolls. If you are an orc and have orc racial, you actually want to use that as you're summoning your Gargoyle, because again, it snapshots on attack power. Once you've done that, you're doing a normal sustain rotation, but staying in Unholy Presence the entire time right now. Getting up Death and Decay, keeping up your diseases, and rotating between Blood Boil and Blood Strike to keep up Desolation. Once your Gargoyle flies back up into the heavens, you will swap back to Blood Presence and sit in Blood Presence for the rest of the fight, doing the same rotation you would for any other situation. From there, the philosophy is always make sure you have as many haste procs going for the longest duration they possibly can while Gargoyle is casting. And that's why you don't have them macroed into the summoning cast of Gargoyle, because then you'll lose out on about 3 seconds of those procs being utilized for the Gargoyle itself, which can be quite large, honestly. And this also means you need to know when your guild is going to be bloodlusting on each encounter. If there are breakpoints during this fight, or if there's places where you can get a haste buff, something like Hodir, and if you can stay in the haste buff the entire time while Gargoyle is down, then that haste buff will be applied to your Gargoyle itself. You want to know when you can actually AoE, because AoE can be a huge amount of damage in this raid, but there are some fights where AoE does absolutely nothing. It's not counted towards your parse, and I will have a breakdown of every single fight for Frost and Unholy Decay and how to parse those coming soon on the channel. So if you want to stay updated with those, make sure to like and subscribe. If you want to see breakdowns of speedruns or as well early tips and tricks for all of the bosses, then make sure to join the channel memberships. It also just supports me as a content creator. But if there's any questions I missed covering here for Unholy Decays moving into phase 2, then definitely let me know here in the comments. If you want to see me play the raid multiple times and go for all of those 100 parses, if I can get them, then definitely come over and check me out on Twitch. There are a few fights where you are actually the #1 DPS, absolutely, but on average, the only class that can beat you throughout the entire raid is Warlocks right now. But again, you have to play really well, and please guys, utilize this guide, or if you have theory crafting questions, join my Discord or Fonz's Discord down in the description. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you all on the next one.